Tonight you will hear many wonderful stories, including my own. In fact, stories are a huge part of my life. I love books and I dedicated my life to improving literacy in the fair city. But first, a little about me. After all, it's the details that make a story great. My name is Ida Kellogg. I was born in Neenah on August 30th, 1869. I'm the only daughter of Arthur and Belle Kellogg, though I have an older brother, Hollis, and a younger brother, Frank. My family has its roots in Racine County, as that's where my father was born. He moved to Neenah in 1861. He was considered a pioneer of the city, which wasn't formally established until 1873. My father had a livery stable for horses and teamed with flour mills. He met my mother here in Neenah and they married in 1865. Throughout his life, my father was interested in making Neenah the best it could be. He was involved in local government, serving as city alderman and city supervisor. He also served 4 terms as city treasurer. He was very busy, but also kept an eye on my siblings and I. Education was very important to us. I graduated from Neenah High School with my younger brother in 1887. Our graduation ceremony was at Schutzen Hall. Back then, each student was required to read an essay they had written or give a speech to graduate. My essay was called Mission of Doubt. My theory was that doubt was actually what drove many early historical events. For example, back in the 16th century, people began to doubt the divine rights of rulers. That eventually led to the Reformation. A little closer to home, our forefathers started to doubt that taxation without representation was just. This belief laid the foundation of our great country. Of course, in both cases, there were other factors, but the role of doubt was my thesis. There were 9 students in my graduating class, including Nellie Maxwell, who went on to become a syndicated columnist for the newspapers. I always enjoyed reading her column, which was called The Kitchen Cupboard. After I graduated, I had a period of uncertainty. I wasn't at all sure what I wanted to do with my life. I enjoyed playing the mandolin, and I joined the Young Ladies Banjo and Guitar Club. We later joined with the Men's Club and had a lot of fun. My love of learning and reading prompted me to join the Eclectic Reading Club, and I also taught Sunday school. But ultimately, I wanted a vocation. I wanted to do something that mattered. At first, I tried millinery, but I quickly discovered that making fancy hats for ladies was not my cup of tea, and I returned to Neenah. As it turned out, I didn't have to go much further than my love of books to discover my true calling. You see, Neenah opened a new library building in 1904. It was a beautiful building right by the water. I spent so much time there reading and looking out the window and daydreaming about fantastical adventures. By 1910, the library was very busy and they needed a new assistant. I was nominated and then hired. I put everything into my job because I loved it so much. In my first year, I'm proud to say I got a raise to $25 a month. That probably does not sound like a lot to you, but to me, it showed how much my employers appreciated my efforts. I was also very popular with the children of Neenah. Between my work at the library and teaching Sunday school, I saw many kids. I really enjoyed helping them pick out books. In 1914, the head librarian position opened. I applied and was hired to be Neenah's head librarian. Now I was busy. Each year, I had to create a report on the circulation of materials at the library. I needed to know how many books were carried and how many active library cards were out there. In 1915, we had 13,000 books and 2,690 active library cards. I made it my mission to improve literacy, and I knew I had to start by reaching out to the community. The first thing I did was to meet with local school teachers to show them what we had to offer. Teachers are the best people to connect with when it comes to reading and learning. The library also hosted Saturday morning story times for children. And then around Thanksgiving, we started an annual book exhibit and focused on children's books. My hope was by sharing titles of books with parents, it would encourage them to buy books at Christmas time. Our efforts really paid off, much more than I even was expecting, and I had set my goals high. By October of 1916, we had set a record with circulating more books than ever before. We even had books in German and Scandinavian languages so that immigrants arriving in Neenah would be able to read books in their native language. We started hearing more and more about the war in Europe. Many of our local boys were being called to serve, and we wanted to help. That meant joining forces with the Red Cross. The Neenah chapter of the Red Cross had headquarters in the Young's Women Building. There, with so much support within our community that they were quickly running out of space. Our library board worked with the executive committee of the Red Cross to move the headquarters to the library. The east wing of the main floor was designated for Red Cross work, and ladies of Neenah came out in droves to help. Some of the city's most influential women were pitching in, like Helen Kimberly Stewart, Vina Shattuck-Beals, Ida Krueger Barnett, and others. I had been able to see many of these ladies before, thanks to our Women's Tuesday Club of Neenah. They met, of course, on Tuesday afternoons in the library meeting rooms. The Tuesday Club is one of the oldest clubs in Neenah, starting way back in 1886. Club members learned about the world and participated in service projects. Because I was so busy working at the library, I was not able to join the club, but sometimes I would listen in for a while. They discussed such timely topics. For example, in January 1918, Amelia Ritchie from the Theta Clark School of Nursing spoke about the control of communicable diseases. And in March of 1918, a girl from my graduating class named Nellie Maxwell spoke about the Hull House in Chicago, where women were working to better the lives of the people through labor reform. Amelia Ritchie's timing was critical. Her speech happened right before the influenza epidemic swept the country. Neenah was not spared from this deadly disease, unfortunately. The newspaper reported the state of Wisconsin was recommending quarantining starting October 12, 1918. At first, the library wasn't included in the closing order, but as the number of cases went up, we started to worry that people would congregate at the library since they had so few places to go. It was a difficult decision, but we closed the library on October 14th. I could not stand the idea that people would not be able to access reading material, especially since we didn't know how long the closure would last. Luckily, we were only closed for 2 weeks. The number of cases began to drop, and we felt comfortable opening the library's doors again. As we reopened the doors, the Red Cross once again used our building to help the soldiers overseas. At the risk of contracting the disease fell, women returned to help. But even with large crowds working in the same room, we took precautions, and the ladies all wore gauze masks. As for me, World War I meant new responsibilities. In March of 1918, the American Protective League put a notice in the newspaper asking the public to help gather information for the American government's war effort. They needed photographs, drawings, postal cards, and any printed or written descriptions of bridges, buildings, towns, and localities in the European territory now occupied by German forces. That included France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and portions of Germany lying west of Hamburg. I helped collect this information, and I'm not allowed to say how much or what type I collected to help the government's war effort. I also used my skills to archive the efforts Neenah was making in fighting this war. I collected newspaper articles about local servicemen and the various war efforts being done throughout the city. In the end, I created 2 scrapbooks of material. It was a big undertaking, but I was so proud of how Neenah came together to help. I feel we positively affected our soldiers as well as the world at large. A librarian's work is never done. After the influenza epidemic faded and the war ended, it was nice to return to a more quiet and normal life. I turned my attention back to reaching out to Neenah residents about all the amazing things they could find at the library. I knew that the best way to inspire readers was to catch their attention early and began visiting the schools in Neenah to talk to the students about books. During my visits at elementary schools, I left lists of recommended books and encouraged all students to visit the library. But I didn't just want to reach children. I wanted adult readers to come to the library too. Remember how I spent all that time clipping newspaper articles about the war? Well, it got me thinking that maybe the newspaper could help me reach adults in the community. Starting in 1922, I had advertisements printed describing current popular books available at the library. Most of the advertisements showcased adult-level books, as we wanted to encourage adults to read. We also started allowing patrons to borrow books for long periods of time during the summer. Our summer vacation special allowed people to borrow 4 fiction books and 6 nonfiction books for the whole summer. The books just needed to be returned by October 1st. We opened the program to children too, though they were only allowed 2 fiction books and 1 nonfiction. It was a huge success. In 1915, we had 2,690 library card holders. By 1923, 3,365 citizens had a library card. I may have been undecided about what I wanted to do after high school, but in the end, I found my calling at the library. I dedicated my life to the library and the citizens of Neenah. I helped the library achieve its goal to serve the people of Neenah efficiently and effectively. Today I hear they are still working towards that mission. I'm proud to think I was just a small part of a worthwhile cause. Unfortunately, my time at the library came to an end as my health deteriorated. I fell ill and died on April 14, 1924, at just 54 years old. In the newspaper, they described me as a splendid character, giving devoted and happy service to my chosen causes. Tonight, you'll hear stories of others who serve their community in different ways. My story may seem more simple, but as you know, when a community is dealing with a pandemic and all the knowns that go with it, sometimes it's the little things, like a good book, that can make all the difference. I am sure the librarians at the Neenah Public Library would be happy to help you find just the right thing for you. Thank you for spending this evening with me and listening to my story. And thank you to the Neenah Historical Society for bringing my story to life.
Good evening, everyone. Gather around and we'll tell our stories. I am Police Chief Charles Watts.
Yes, hello. We're just two public servants ready to chat about days long past. But first, introductions are in order.
Charles Watts, born in Manitowoc, 1867. I came to Neenah in 1884 to serve on the police force. In fact, I was police chief for many, many years. At first, the position was appointed annually, so I served from 1867 to 1897, and again from 1899 to 1900. Then I had a long string of service from 1916 to 1940. So of course, I've seen a few things change in our fine city of Neenah.
I'm George Christoph, and I was born in Beaver Dam in 1863. I moved here with my parents when I was just 5 years old. While Charles was police chief, I became a head of the fire department. I served as fire chief from 1909 to 1918.
That's right, we were both chiefs.
Of course, the departments were much different from what these fine people know now. You see, when I came to Neenah, the city only had volunteer firemen. So I had to work on top of being a firefighter. I had a string of jobs, including a draying business with my brother. We used a low flatbed wagon to carry goods for sale, and after that, I was an agent of the Standard Oil Company.
Well, to be honest, when I first started with the Neenah Police Department, I wasn't sure if it was for me. It was a very small department, and I wasn't making enough money to support my family. When a different chief was appointed in 1900, I took a few years off to figure out what I really wanted to do. I moved around the state and tried my hand at all sorts of things. Why? In my lifetime, I was a farmer, a salesman, a night watchman, but ultimately, I knew that police work was my true calling. So I returned to Neenah.
But before you came back, Neenah had some very big fires. Do you remember hearing anything about what happened in 1910?
Well, I remember people saying that was a bad year. There was a huge fire in April, right by the St. Paul Railroad Depot on the island, right?
Yes, 6 big oil tankers were destroyed. There was a huge explosion that sent debris 200 feet into the air. At the time, someone said it looked like Mount Vesuvius. I've never seen a volcano, but I can imagine what that really looked like. But being there, I saw a huge fireball for sure, and the explosion blew a 200-pound iron into the air. It was really something to see. Amazingly, there was no death or injury reported, and we got really lucky that time.
And then there was the Ansbach fire, wasn't there? That one in 1910 as well?
That's right. October of 1910, there was a large fire at the Ansbach department store. The entire building and everything inside were destroyed, either by fire, smoke, or water. It was so bad we had to have our friends from the Menasha Fire Department help us out. It was a devastating loss for Mr. Ansbach, but he was a great businessman and ultimately pulled through. He actually built a new building on the same spot and was very successful for many years. Now, when did you come back to Neenah?
In 1916, after the state legislature changed some rules for police and the fire departments. Commissions were formed, and this created more formalized departments. For me, it meant that if I could get a job as police chief, I could stay in that position instead of having to be appointed every year. When the chief position came open in 1916, I was one of 10 men who applied. 6 made it to the interview and test portion. I was feeling confident until I finally realized there was a problem with my application. Because I spent so much time traveling, I didn't meet the residency requirement that called for applicants to live in Neenah for the last 3 years.
I remember that, but you had prior experience here in Neenah, and I think that made all the difference.
Yes, the Police and Fire Commission struck down the residency requirement for me and gave me the job. When I took office in 1916, things were busy. We only had 4 staffed police officers, including myself, to handle everything in the city. Very quickly, I got permission to hire a desk sergeant. Basically, it was someone who stayed at City Hall, answering the police phone and dealing with people who came into the station. That way, residents could always reach someone, even if all of the officers were out on the road.
And while you were working on administration, we were working on fires. In March, fire broke down in the downtown area.
That's terrible. There'd been fires downtown before, right? Really bad ones? If I remember correctly, didn't an entire city block burn in 1883?
Yes, that was the Pettibone block fire. This one wasn't as bad as that. It started in the basement of the Home Trade shoe store on Krueger's block of Wisconsin Avenue. Because of its location, a lot of businesses were affected, but no one suffered a total loss and no one was hurt or killed.
I remember my sister talking about that fire. Didn't it lead to some operational changes for you guys?
Yes, in 1916 was part of the new changes at the fire department. Remember, firefighting was done on a volunteer basis at the time, with someone bringing their team of horses to hook to the wagon and steam pumper when a fire came in. Appleton had a fire truck at the time, and I desperately wanted one for Neenah. But we needed to move away from volunteer firefighters and start paying for people risking their lives. The budget was a huge concern, and originally we wanted to staff 6 firefighters, but the city council thought it was too high. A lot of back and forth happened, and we convinced the council to approve 2 paid firefighters as well as a new fire engine. We were also given permanent space in the city hall building, and we continued to rely on volunteers, but at least we made a start moving forward.
It's funny, we keep talking about how 1916 was a bad year, but really it was nothing comparing to 1918.
Yes, World War I made things very difficult, even here in our little city of Neenah.
In 1917, the local draft exemption board started requiring young men to complete questionnaires before they were drafted to fight overseas. Unfortunately, many young men didn't take it seriously and refused to fill out the questionnaires. Those boys were considered draft dodgers. I had to track them all down and convince them to fill out their forms. If they didn't, I had to arrest them. Luckily, after a few words from me, most men decided it would be better just to fill out the forms. I didn't have to arrest anyone.
I remember that. I helped to register some men in the First Ward in 1918. By then, they knew it was better to follow the rules instead of risking having to talk to you.
I didn't think it was that bad, but war is a serious business. The war brought other duties to my desk. I was part of what was called alien registrations. Under orders from the federal government, I had to register all German immigrants who didn't become natural citizens. We had to collect their information and issue identification cards that included their fingerprints. At first, it was just men, but eventually cards were issued for women too. As you can imagine, it was a big job. I was working 12-hour shifts just to get it all done.
And with all that going on, the influenza pandemic hit. They called it the Spanish flu, and it basically took over our lives in October of 1918. The health officer closed up schools and churches in hopes of stopping the disease from spreading. It was a crazy time. No one knew much about the disease, only that it seemed to spread quickly when people gathered. Luckily, Neenah residents heeded the warnings of Dr. Ozanne and Mayor Clark and stayed home.
Businesses posted notices asking customers not to loiter or congregate at the establishment. They asked people to make their purchases and leave at once. The notices stated that they were for the protection of your health and that of all others in the community. If not complied with, more drastic measures will be necessary. Basically, we were warning people that if they didn't stop gathering in public places, we might be forced to close down even more things.
I remember that notice. I saw it in places like saloons, pool rooms, ice cream parlors, even at the bowling alley. People could bowl, but they couldn't watch their friends. It was so strange, but I'm glad it didn't last too long, and it didn't get any worse.
Can you imagine how awful it would be if it didn't last, if it lasted more than 2 weeks? Or so we had in place? People would have become so frustrated and unhappy if they were forced to stay home any longer.
Once the pandemic slowed down, we got back to work. The city council passed a new ordinance. It paid for an official fire department, meaning we no longer had to rely on volunteers. By the end of 1918, I was confident the department was heading in the right direction. It was just as well because I'd been thinking it was time to step down. I was getting older and my health wasn't the best. I no longer felt I was physically up for the challenge of firefighting. I decided it was time to leave things to the younger guys. Louis Rausch took over as the first fire chief of the paid fire department on January 1st, 1919. He was a veteran and one of the drivers of the first motorized truck. I knew the department was in good hands.
That was a sad day when you retired. You were so very well respected. But you did stay involved with the fire department, even from the sidelines, right?
Yes, I remember how thrilled I was when the department purchased a new hook and ladder truck. That was back in 1920. It worked so much better with the hose cart and chemical truck we purchased in 1916. It could hold so much more equipment and it had a longer ladder. Chief Rausch made a great decision recommending that truck.
He sure did. We were able to make some improvements in the police department too. In September of 1929, we started training a junior police force of students at local schools. The kids helped their fellow students cross busy streets and helped out with street crossings during parades. It was a great way for younger people to be more involved with the police department, which continued to expand over the years.
Our fire and police department saw a lot of changes, and all of them helped the community and its residents. It was an honor to serve the people of Neenah. After I retired, I stayed active in the Neenah Club and Knights of Pyethas, but being a firefighter is tough, and my health never recovered. I died here in Neenah on July 14th, 1935.
Police work was weighing on my health too. I had a minor stroke in 1935, but stayed on as chief until June 1st of 1940. I had happily served the department for 30 years. 28 of those years, I'd been the police chief. Irv Stilp took over for me, continuing my work towards making the city safer and better. Unfortunately, I didn't last very long after I retired. I died here in Neenah on November 13th, 1940, just 5 months after leaving the job. I left behind my wife and 2 daughters.
I had never married. My life was spent dedicated to service, and I don't regret a single moment of it. I saw so many changes in Neenah, and it was exciting for me to watch the community grow.
I loved my life of service too. It meant so much to me that I was able to protect our community. The things we accomplished helped create the beautiful city we stand in. And that's a legacy worth having. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to our cemetery walk again this year. It's always a pleasure to see you and to educate you more on the wonderful people that lived here in our dear little Neenah. Hello, my name is Mathilda Krueger Lamping. You can call me Tilly because everyone did. I was born right here in Neenah on August 21st in 1869. My parents were A.H.F. and Maria Krueger. I had 8 siblings and was the youngest girl. Back then, child mortality rates were high. Our family was no exception. Of my parents' 9 children, only 5 survived to adulthood. My family lived on Forest Avenue, and I attended the 3rd Ward School, just across the street from our house. Now it's called Roosevelt Elementary School. My best friend, Jessie Kerwin, lived just down the street from us. We were inseparable. People said we looked so much alike, we could be twins. It's really a shame we aren't neighbors here in the cemetery. My actual grave plot with the Kruegers is over there by Oak Ridge. I'm sure my friends Mr. and Mr. Kerwin won't mind us visiting here tonight. I graduated from Neenah High School in 1885 and then went to the Chicago, Illinois Training School for Nurses, a school affiliated with Rush Medical College. Jessie and I remained close friends even though we were far apart. She later married C.B. Clark Jr. We called him Bill. In 1890, I graduated from the Illinois Training School and went to work at Cook County Hospital. After assisting for a few years in the surgical department, Dr. Nicholas Sen asked me to be his chief surgical nurse. Dr. Sen was most of the important doctors in America at the time. He was chief of surgery at Presbyterian Hospital in Cook County, and he also taught at Rush Medical College. He taught me so much. We would often discuss surgical practices over dinner, which didn't go real well with the people sitting around us. Okay, I know what you're thinking. A nurse and a famous physician spending all this time together? I don't blame you. My sisters thought the same thing. But my relationship with Dr. Sen was strictly professional. In 1900, the Lutheran Hospital in La Crosse, Wisconsin contacted me. They wanted me to head up their nursing staff, so I moved back to my home state. I lived with the Gunderson family while in La Crosse. Dr. Gunderson founded the Gunderson Clinic, and today the Gunderson Health System is the largest employer in La Crosse County. In the fall of 1903, my father came to visit me. I told him how I wanted to study public nursing at Columbia University, and he encouraged me. The next year, I was all set to go when I learned my father had died. He was such an important person in Neenah, serving as mayor. He was also a businessman, a state assemblyman. I really felt he understood me because he was also interested in the medical field. He helped build the Winnebago County Asylum and ended up being its trustee. While he focused on mental health, I focused on physical health. We both shared an interest in helping others. To honor him, I vowed to return to Columbia and get my public nursing degree, which I'm proud to say I did fulfill my promise, but it took a while. I stayed at the Lutheran Hospital in La Crosse until 1907. That fall, I moved to Detroit to become the head of the Farron Nursing Training School at Harper Hospital. It was a large institution and a challenging position. I stayed at Farron for 6 years. At that point, I decided I needed more specialized training, so I moved to New York to finally work on my degree in public health nursing at Columbia University. I graduated in 1913 and spent a few months caring for the poor in the mountains of North Carolina. I traveled by horseback, visiting people in their homes. We were the only medical help these people had, and I was honored to provide this much-needed service. Despite this important work, I felt there was still more I could do. You see, the war was breaking out in Europe. I felt the call to serve. I signed up with the Red Cross. We headed a group of 120 nurses who were sent to Serbia. To say I was dedicated, little understatement. My sister kept a letter that I had written to her before we sailed. In it, I said, we might be blown up by the Germans before we reach Serbia, but I'd be willing to risk it all over again. Luckily for me, our 3-week journey to Finland on the SS Finland went smoothly. We arrived in Athens, Greece in 1914 and were met by the American consul and a delegation of 38 Americans. They, however, weren't thrilled to see us. They told us of the dangers we faced, and they said they feared they'd never see us again. We didn't let that stop us. We were transferred to the Serbian front in a place called Gurjili. Alongside 15 nurses, I tended to the wounded in a field hospital so inadequate and filthy that an operating room had to be set up across the street in a hotel. Later, we turned a tobacco factory into a hospital, but even that wasn't enough. The factory was supposed to hold 1,400 patients. Within a few days, we had 640 additional wounded to care for. Serbia had no nurses to send us and was relying solely on the American Red Cross. I was both a supervisor and an acting nurse for many months. It was exhausting and disheartening. Typhus was rampant. I lost 2 of my nurses before I too caught the dreadful disease. By the spring of 1915, I was on the brink of death, suffering from typhus and pneumonia. I was sent to Athens to recuperate, and while there, Queen Sophia called me to the palace. Well, not really the palace actually, because I was still recovering and she didn't want to put her 2 small children at risk. She awarded me a medal for meritorious service to the Greek government. And even more flattering, the Queen requested that I start a training school for nurses in Greece. I wasn't able to do that, but it was quite an honor for my brave nurses to be recognized by the Greeks in this way. In order to fully recuperate from typhus, I was sent back home to Neenah in May of 1915. My nursing services were so desperately needed, I really didn't want to leave. But eventually I realized that going home would give me new opportunities to help the soldiers and push for more sanitary conditions in hospitals. I gave newspaper interviews and speeches encouraging people to support the Red Cross. I urged young people to consider careers in nursing. Once people heard about the conditions our doctors and nurses were working in, they were much more willing to provide supplies and financial support. In 1917, I was asked to teach a class in Neenah taught through the Red Cross. I would teach women basic first aid and nursing care. My good friend, Jessie Kerwin Clark, was elected president of this class, and she was able to get 30 women from the Young Women's Club to join. I was so happy to get back to teaching and to work with Jessie and these enthusiastic young women. While I taught in Neenah, the war in Europe continued and I kept a wary eye on the events overseas. In August of 1917, I received orders from the Red Cross to go to Waco, Texas for field work. When I arrived, I helped establish their first public health clinic. While in Waco, I met Mr. Weissop and his British-born wife. Do you know him? Mr. Weissop came to Neenah in the 1920s to manage the newly opened Valley Inn. The Weissops would end up becoming very good friends with my family. I've spent so much time talking about my career, you're probably wondering if love ever played a part in my life. Well, it did, I'm happy to say. You see, back in 1890, when I was in Chicago working with Dr. Sen, I met a handsome young medical student named Tom Lamping. He graduated at the top of his class at Rush College and started working as a physician and surgeon in Chicago. For the next 25 years, we stayed in touch through letters, the occasional visit, and eventually we fell in love. Most women at that time married young, but here we both were, around 50, and finally ready to marry. We had a small ceremony at my sister Dora's house on Forest Avenue on March 1st, 1919. We had to keep things simple because of the influenza pandemic that was going around. Health guidelines required all gatherings should be small and we followed the rules. I'm sure you know what that's like. Tom and I went back to Chicago, where he had his practice in the suburbs of Oak Park. My health wasn't the best, but I worked as the office nurse and relished my work at home. I was also active in the community, serving the Illinois Training School, as well as being a board member of the Art Institute, and I attended meetings at the Oak Park Women's Club. I spoke fluent German, Deutsch, and French, Français, and was often called on to translate. Those were the good years. But Tom was hiding a secret from me. And I found out in the most peculiar way. My sister, her husband, and I took a trip to Florida. On a lark, we decided to go visit a fortune teller. I didn't have much faith in that kind of stuff. But the fortune teller told me someone in a northern city was taking money from a safe deposit box. We laughed it off and enjoyed the rest of our trip. But when I got home, I found that Tom had taken much of our savings and lost it at the racetrack. And his gambling got worse from there. Then our practice started to dwindle and the stock market crashed. As the Depression rolled on in the 1930s, we had to move. All we could afford was a small apartment on the west side of Chicago. It was full of lice. While we lived frugally, others were in far worse situations. Our apartment was robbed many times because people assume doctors would have drugs. Our car was stolen several times. It was recovered each time. It was also damaged each time. But don't think my life was all hardship. I had a wonderful experience in 1933. The Roosevelt administration asked me to locate all of the Red Cross nurses who had served with me in Serbia. We were to be honored at the Chicago World's Fair. Eleanor Roosevelt was the guest of honor, and she spent the day at the exposition. It was a beautiful day. I took my sister and my niece with me to the fair. We were able to see Mrs. Roosevelt. She even patted my dear little niece on her head. It was wonderful to be recognized for our service in the war. In 1944, Tom and I moved again, this time to be closer to my family. We had a small cottage on Lake Winnebago in Neenah, but Tom's spirit was broken and his health was failing. He died in the spring of 1946. I was lonely in the cottage all by myself, so I went to live with my niece in Neenah. Sadly, I had a terrible fall Christmas Eve, 1947, and fractured my hip. I never fully recovered and passed away on March 18th, 1948. Although my life had its ups and downs, I was so proud of what I had been able to accomplish with my nursing career. I'm very grateful that I was able to make a service, make a difference here in Neenah and the country as a whole. I'd like to think my service overseas also changed people's lives for the better. Caring for health of others was my calling, and I'm honored to have served. Thank you. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't know what typhus was. It was an infectious disease caused by lice, ticks, mites, and fleas. It causes a purple rash, headache, fever, usually delirium, and caused high mortality during the war. Yeah, ick. We don't need that anymore. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Benjamin Clark Jr., and my friends call me Bill. I am actually buried right on the other side over here with my wife and child. My father, a prominent man in the city of Neenah, known as C.B. Clark, founder of the Kimberly-Clark Corporation, along with mayor of the city of Neenah, is right over here, with my sister, Theta, long E, not Theta, Theta, long E. is buried over there. And I have been pretty much overshadowed by their endeavors. But that's okay. I was born in September of 1882 in Neenah. If you're doing the math, that makes me 139 years old today. I'm old. And because I'm old, I have to have notes every now and then, because I'm forgetful. So please bear with me. Every now and then I will refer to notes just to make sure I have the dates right. As I said, I was born here in Neenah in September of 82. And my father was mayor of the city of Neenah. And as you all know, in 1882, the Neenah Times was our local newspaper. They actually published my announcement, and I have to read it to you. It is so lovely. It says, a host of friends of our popular mayor, C.B. Clark, and his lovely wife will join the Times in congratulating them heartily on the advent of a boy at their home. May he live to be mayor of the city of his nativity. Wow, isn't that peer pressure, huh? Be mayor of the city of his nativity on the day he was born. Well, in fact, as I said, I was very much overshadowed by my father and sister, but that's okay. I attended public school here in Neenah, and then I went off to Peekskill Military Academy, which you all know is in New York, upstate New York. Actually, not really upstate New York. It's about an hour or so outside of the city of New York. And then I attended Yale University. While at Yale, tragedy struck my family. You see, my eldest sister, Theda, was with child, and she had trouble giving birth and passed away shortly thereafter. My sister and I were close, and we were very close, and it's hard for me to talk about it sometimes, but in her will, we talked about setting some money aside to do something for the community. I just didn't think it would be this soon. But we decided that, Neenah had medical care issues early on in the 1900s. So we decided that we needed a hospital here in Neenah. Well, I went back to Yale and graduated from Yale in 1904. So the next year I graduated. I came back here to Neenah, and I started working at Kimberly-Clark. I also started working on ambitious plans to build a hospital. But as any young man wanted, I also had other endeavors. I like to call her Miss Jessie Kerwood. Now, Miss Jessie Kerwood, who's buried next to me, over on the other side here, her family is over here on the way over there where Tilly Krieger is. If you saw Tilly's her best friend, right over there. A very prominent, community-oriented family were the Kerwoods. Her father was a prominent lawyer here in Neenah and ended up on Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We were married on January 4th of 1908 in the Kerwood home, which is located on the corner of 5th and East Forest Avenue. I believe there's a four-way stop there, so the next time you're there going east on East Forest Avenue, look to your left, and that's the Kerwood house. So I was married there to my beautiful partner who had very similar ideals and goals that I did. So we made an outstanding match. I decided that the best way to help understand this community of ours was to see the operations from behind the scenes. So in the spring of '08, I decided to run for alderman for the 1st Ward, and I won. Now, Neenah, at the time, wasn't, let's say, as clean and family-friendly as we know it today. There were some, let's say, unsavory places here, and some inappropriate things that would take place here on a regular basis. something that we would find, let's say, with a sister city on the other side of the island, maybe. No, we love our sister city on the other side of the island there. But we needed to clean these things up. Also in the summer of '08, I was working on Theda's hospital. And in the plans we had a working operating room, and we had the ability to see 25 patients at once. We needed a chunk of land. So I purchased a chunk of land on the island, a beautiful chunk of land on the island to build this hospital in. So ground was broke in 1908 to start building this hospital on the island. Now my lovely wife Jessie was with child. And unfortunately, the hospital was not completed when she was ready to give birth. So we traveled to Chicago, and our child Joan was born in Chicago. Weeks later, the hospital was opened, known as Clark Memorial Hospital. It was opened 6 years after my sister's death, and it was her final wishes to have a hospital here in the community to help the healthcare facilities out. Later on, it was changed to Theda Clark Memorial Hospital because of her lifelong dream to help out the Neenah community. The hospital was busy right off the start, but we were thinking long term we needed to be ready. So our next step was to find qualified nurses. And the best place to find qualified nurses was to create our own school. So we started the Theda Clark School of Nursing in 1910. Now when the school first opened up, we didn't have a building yet, so our nurses had to do some work down in Cook County Hospital in Chicago. But by 1912, we had our own building right next to the hospital. Our thought process here was we're going to create nurses, we're going to attract nurses to come to our school, create high quality nurses. They're going to fall in love with our community and be in lockstep with our hospital. So it was like a win-win situation for all of us, that we get qualified nurses in this great hospital of ours. And we did that up until 1938. In 1938, the federal government made some regulation changes and we were forced to close our doors. But between 1910 and 1938, we had 126 nurses that graduated from our program, and we're very, very proud of that. Now, I have to admit that I'm truly happy when I'm working the hardest. Now, we have the hospital up and running. We got the School of Nursing up and running. I'm working for Kimberly Clark, but I'm looking around the city and I see the city still needs some help. And I decide it's time to run for mayor of the city. Partly because I see the city needs the help, maybe because of the newspaper when I was a kid. Little push, little incentive, but in 1912, I became mayor of the city of Neenah till 1920. And with the city council, I worked very diligently in literally and figuratively cleaning up the streets of Neenah. Some of the things that we wanted to work on was we wanted to crack down on less desirable businesses. We wanted to prohibit spitting on city streets and public areas. And, we wanted to prevent people from letting their animals run wild in the city. Tried to prohibit minors and drunkards from getting alcohol. And if you live in the city of Neenah today, some of these ordinances are still out there. A little side note, try to buy alcohol at a gas station in the city of Neenah. Impossible. No gas station in the city of Neenah sells alcohol. You gotta go someplace else to get that. Neenah was changing. And in 1918, in early 19 teens, we're in the midst of World War I. And Europe was very active. Jesse's friend, Tilly Krieger, who is over here in the Kerwoods, she's over there talking. If you maybe saw Tilly over there. Tilly was our first choice, by the way, to help run the School of Nursing. But if you heard Tilly's story, she's a very, very busy woman. So because of her busyness, she opted not to be our first administrator. But she recommended a lovely lady by the name of Amelia Ritchie to take over, and did a wonderful job. Tilly was over in Europe in World War I, and she came back to Neenah and told us about the unsanitary hospital conditions and the lack of nurses up there. And the city of Neenah and the people of the Neenah community stepped up and tried to help out in the World War I effort. So we tried to get more supplies into the war zone and try to encourage more women to go into nursing. Jessie, my wife, and I also got involved with and started the American Red Cross here in Neenah in 1917. So the chapter of the American Red Cross came here, and our goal again is to help out the Neenah community, along with helping out veterans and their families. It also helped teach first aid. It also was involved with encouraging nurses to go into our School of Nursing, because of the need for them over in Europe. Now, Jessie and I stuck with the American Red Cross even after the war was done. In 1918, when I was mayor, something called the Spanish flu hit the area. Maybe you've heard of the Spanish flu. We had our doctor. I had to appoint Dr. Ozanne. How many of you heard Dr. Ozanne today? He was over that way. Yes. Well, I appointed him because our doctor, Dr. Del Marcel, was called up and fighting in World War I over in Europe. And at the same time, the state of Wisconsin, in October 10th of 1918, put a quarantine out for the entire state. And I have to read to you what they quarantine. They quarantine all schools, churches, Sunday schools, theaters, and moving picture shows were closed. Lodge meetings and public gatherings were prohibited. And I'm sure you would understand how those things would work. Maybe you'd be a little fearful of those things. Well, on October 15th, the mayor of the city of Menasha, myself, and our city health individuals got together to see what we could do to maybe close other businesses. And we decided instead to prohibit loitering from our fine organizations here. We thought that would balance our merchants' interests and the public risk to prevent loitering. So if you heard the police chief and the fire chief, they alluded to enforcing this. Now, this quarantine, we started it on October 15th, and we ended it on November 4th of 1918. It was 2 treacherous weeks of quarantine. I don't know how we did it, but we did it. I want to make Neenah a very beautiful city. And as mayor, that was one of my goals. When I was a kid, I lived next door to this lady by the name of Clara Shattuck. When I was mayor, Clara approached me and said she wanted to help beautify the city by donating land next to the library for a park. Isn't that interesting? I wonder what we should call that park. What did we call that park? Shattuck Park. Have you been to Shattuck Park? Is it very beautiful? Very nice park, isn't it? Well, that got me thinking. My father, who now has passed away, owned a chunk of land on the island down from the hospital. It was marshy land that he wanted to fill in and make build a house there. So I got our heirs together and I said, hey, why don't we donate this land to the city to make a park and playground for kids? So we got some neighbors on Lincoln Street to donate some of their property, and we donated this chunk of land to the city. And the city started leveling the land, and they filled it all in. They created a real cool little island and lagoon right there. They had these stone bridges that we put in. Those are very, very cool stone bridges. And they called it Island Park at the time. A little fun fact, those bridges are wide enough to get some people across, but narrow enough so a car could not get across, keeping those juvenile delinquents at bay. Well, it was known as Island Park for quite some time until one of the neighbors, a lady by the name of Mrs. John Strange, who had this cabin known as Doty Cabin, and she donated it to the city, and we added this chunk of land to the property, and then we thought it would be nice to change the name of this island to Doty Island. It's a very nice place to get your picture taken when you get married, isn't it? Up on one of those bridges, maybe for prom someday, you could go there. Well, so we got Doty Park up and going. In the 1930s, the people in Neenah would go swimming in Lake Winnebago. We had a bathhouse and a swimming area over where the Neenah Waterworks is today. It was fun swimming in Lake Winnebago with the algae and the lake flies and such. Maybe not so much. Well, by the late 30s, the bathhouse was becoming very dilapidated. So a friend of mine, Frank Shattuck, and myself got together and thought maybe we should build a pool. We'll help fund and construct a pool for the city. And it's in the midst of the 1930s, so we got the federal government involved, an organization known as the Public Works Administration. A lot of us would call it the WPA. So we got the WPA, Frank and myself, approached the city and said to the city in 1938, if you fork in $25,000, we'll fund the construction, we'll buy the land, secure the land, and help build this. Mayor Ed Kaufus was all over it. He loved the idea. City Council, not so much. But through a few talking, negotiation, they came around and eventually the pool was a go. And by 1940, we built an Olympic-sized pool where the bathhouse used to be located, where it is today. How many of you were in the old pool in Neenah? Okay. The very first year it was opened in 1940, 70,000 visitors. Amazing. In 1942, the National Women's Swimming and Diving Championship was held there. Thousands of swimmers from all over the country came to Neenah, Wisconsin to swim. How many of you remember the toboggan run? Remember the toboggan run that was up there? Okay, if you haven't remembered the toboggan run, on the Neenah Historical website, there's a Flickr account, okay, and you can see thousands of pictures of Neenah and Menasha. You got to go check it out. Okay, I jumped out of character. I'm jumping back into character now. Sorry about that. That was a little advertisement there. At the Neenah pool, along with people going to swim, we also thought it was very important to have swim lessons, sponsored by, yes, the American Red Cross. We live in Neenah. There's lots of water around Neenah. It's very important to learn to swim. I think that working for the city all my life, I've been very busy. I like the things that I've done to the city. I was also involved in the Riverside Paper Corporation. I was director in the Kimberly-Clark Corporation. I was another director for the First National Bank of Neenah, also in Appleton. I also was involved in the hardwood products. The hardwood products today, maybe you know it as Eggers Industry over on Lake Street. They make beautiful architectural doors that you will find all over the world, made in most hospitals, in office buildings, in hotels, and even a little White House in Washington, D.C. has doors made in Neenah, Wisconsin. So the next time you go see the president, check out the doors. I was also involved with the Neenah Club, founding member of the Neenah Club with a man by the name of Mr. Sensenbrunner. I was a 32nd Mason and very active in my church, the First Presbyterian Church. But I have to say, my love, my passion, my killer was golf. Love to play golf. Do we have any golfers out there? No? Couple golfers out there? I love to play golf with my family, especially my daughter Joan. And to be honest with you, she was a much better golfer than I was. She won several championships before she was married. Well, in the spring of 1949, my wife Jessie and I, we traveled to Florida, down to Palm Beach, Florida. Early morning, I went out to play golf, and I had a heart attack and died on the golf course. And for a golfer, that's like heaven, isn't it? So on April 6th, in 1949, I passed away in Palm Beach, Florida, and the communities of Neenah and Menasha mourned my loss, like they mourned when my father and my sister next to me over here passed away. And according to the Neenah Times, the newspaper, they said, and I have to read the quote, they said that they would hope that, and they challenge the Neenah Menasha residents to carry on what they called the C.B. Clark tradition. In other words, according to the article, that C.B. Clark tradition was for the community to take pride in their living together on high levels of civic endeavor. So C.B. Clark wanted all of us to put pride into our cities, to take on the civic endeavor out there, and that is my story tonight. So please go live the C.B. Clark tradition. Thank you very much.
Hello, I hope you're in fine fettle this evening. And health is very important, as I'm sure you know. I've heard you've had quite a tough year or so because of a pandemic. I had my own experiences with the pandemic, and they were rather hands-on. You see, I'm a doctor, Dr. Irving Ozanne to be precise. I was born July 28, 1865 in Somers, which is in the southern part of the great state of Wisconsin. My father was an immigrant from Guernsey. Yes, like the cows. Actually, Guernsey is a little island between England and France. Yes, they do have cows there, but my family wasn't involved in the dairy industry. My father was a doctor, and I followed his footsteps. My father, James, came to Somers as a small child. His parents owned a farm as well as a mill for grinding grain into flour. It didn't interest my father at all. He went to Hahnemann Medical College in Chicago and graduated shortly before I was born. I was one of 6 children born to James and Maria Ozanne, and they are right there. I had 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters, and a younger brother. I was always interested in my father's work, and I knew from a very early age that I wanted to become a doctor as well. The problem was that the village of Somers is pretty small. My father was a well-known and respected physician. There just wasn't enough work for another doctor. Plus, one of my older brothers, James, wanted to be a doctor too. The area couldn't support 2 doctors, let alone 3. So I struck out on my own by attending and graduating from Northwestern University in Illinois and the Dunham Homeopathic Medical College in Chicago. My brother James went on his own way too, moving north to Oshkosh, where he set up practice in 1887. Luckily for me, because I was ready to start my own practice. He told me about the towns and cities in the Fox River Valley that were badly in need of a doctor. I came for a visit and fell in love with Neenah, so I decided to set up shop. The advertisement, if it's passing around, is the advertisement for that setting up shop. Fate seemed to be on my side. A doctor in the area, Dr. Beach, had passed away, and his practice was for sale. I bought it and leased his office space, which was right above the Kalfa's General Store downtown. It was March of 1900, and I remember putting my first business card in the newspaper. Irving Ozanne, MD, homeopathic physician and surgeon. I was so proud. With my dreams of becoming a doctor fulfilled, it was time to start working on my personal life. As I was new to Neenah, I didn't know anyone. I decided to get involved with some local groups, I love to sing, so joining the choir at my Methodist church was an obvious choice. I also joined the Twin City Male Chorus Club. I formed some really great friendships with some of the choir members. I also decided to get married. I had known Miss Margarita Beers for a while. Her family was from Harvey, a small city south of Chicago, but she agreed to move up to Neenah to be with me. We were married on June 23rd, 1903. We took a quick honeymoon trip before settling in Neenah, and eventually our union would be blessed with 4 children. My practice was going well. I had started my family, I was involved in the community, but I also felt drawn to city government. My father had been town clerk in Summers while I was growing up, and something about it really interested me. Neenah had several positions that city council members elected physicians to cover. In 1906, I was elected as a city health officer, also known as a city physician. One of my jobs was a yearly evaluation to make sure that properties in the city met certain sanitary conditions. Remember, this was 1906. The city didn't have a system to collect garbage, and I'll admit, some of our citizens were quite messy. My job was to tell those people to either clean up their property or pay a fine when the city had to clean it up for them. Most of them did the cleaning up, but they weren't happy about it. I was also responsible for tracking and recording the number of births and deaths, as well as the causes of those deaths. I had to track contagious diseases in the city and regularly report on any cases of the diseases that were easily spread, such as smallpox, diphtheria, scarlet fever, chickenpox, and measles. Part of my job was to put families affected by those diseases into quarantine. It was the only way to prevent a big outbreak and ultimately save lives. The position of the city physician or health officer is elected each year by city council. I was elected each year from 1912 to 1914, and again in 1926 and 27. In 1913, the city of Neenah was able to pass a rule about garbage collection. Residents had to get a covered trash can and then could only put certain types of items in it for collection. I thought this was a fantastic idea. It would vastly improve the city's cleanliness and overall look. Unfortunately, many of the people of Neenah disagreed with me. To say the rollout of the garbage collection was a disaster is an understatement, though I'm not sure why it failed. Maybe it was the fact that a can was required, or how the billing was done, or maybe it was a communication problem over what would actually be thrown away. Regardless, the citywide garbage collection came to a screeching halt. Citywide garbage collection would continue to be an issue for another 17 years. Think about that. Until Helen Kimberly Stewart finally helped get the measure passed. In September of 1917, the city physician at the time was Dr. C.C. Del Marcel, and he was called to serve in World War I. Mayor Bill Clark asked me if I'd be willing to step in and fill the role for Dr. Del Marcel until he could return. I, of course, agreed, never suspecting what was coming our way. As 1918 began, we started hearing more and more about the influenza pandemic, commonly called Spanish flu. Considering the ongoing war and the number of young men gathering in army training camps across America, I was worried about how fast that disease would spread. I helped organize a city board of health in April 1918, and we focused on the flu pandemic. By fall, state officials were involved. Mandatory quarantine orders started going out as officials tried to stop the disease's spread. On October 12, 1918, the city of Neenah underwent quarantine. We didn't know how long it would last, and that led to even more concerns. Is this all sounding a little bit familiar? How could we protect Neenah citizens without jeopardizing the city's economy? We had to walk a narrow line to avoid disaster. City officials from Neenah and Menasha, as well as the superintendent of schools and the aldermen of the health committees, met on October 15th to discuss what additional steps we could take. They recommended closing certain things like schools, churches, banning loitering at other businesses. Even though the local flu cases were not terribly serious, the Board of Health wanted to limit exposure as much as possible. We were ready to issue a total lockdown for the city if we had to. From what I've heard, you can probably all understand exactly what the city was going through. As you can imagine, I was not the most popular person in town when the quarantine order came down. But I was focused on protecting as many people as I could. There was a shortage of doctors and nurses, with so many people overseas helping out with the war effort. Despite the unpopularity of the quarantine, Neenah residents came through. We did have a number of flu cases, but very few casualties. I followed the guidelines from Madison and finally was able to lift the quarantine on November 4th, 1918. But as life returned to normal, my work on the pandemic didn't stop. I had to monitor the number of cases and severity. I constantly reminded my clients, as well as the residents of Neenah as a whole, to keep their guard up. I'm sure you're familiar with all the recommendations I gave out. Washing hands, stay away from crowded places, cover your coughs and sneezes, limit visits to family and friends. It's all sounding a little relevant. We still had to issue household quarantine orders whenever a case popped up, but luckily we didn't have any more citywide ordinances. As the number of flu cases dwindled, I was able to settle back into my regular routine. I was on staff at the beautiful Theta Clark, and my children were flourishing in the public school system. Ironically, it ended up being weather rather than a pandemic that brought the city to a standstill. Remember the day, it was February 22nd, 1922, and a terrible ice storm hit the area. I've never seen so many trees branches down. No one could go anywhere because so many trees were blocking the roads, not to mention the slippery conditions of the roads themselves. Power lines were down all over. City officials even turned off the electricity as a precaution. The newspaper had to be printed using good old-fashioned tractor power. They literally hooked up the press to a tractor with a belt. How's that for Wisconsin know-how? We were lucky in that no one was badly hurt in the storm. One of the workers fixing power lines did suffer some injuries, but I was able to fix him up. My health started to decline in late 1927, although I was able to push through the worst of the problems. I had to shut down my practice for a while, though. Eventually, I decided that instead of practicing medicine full-time, I should slow down a little and enjoy the time away from the office. My kids were getting older, and I was so proud of their successes. Unfortunately, tragedy did hit our family in February of 1931. My firstborn son, Irving Jr., one of those right here, passed away in Delafield. He had been sick for almost 7 months and died of a hemorrhage. He was a brilliant boy, born in 1904 in the salutatorian of the Neenah class of 1922. He graduated from Lawrence University with honors and decided to go to chemistry school at the University of Illinois. He was just about to graduate when he got sick. I always wondered what he would have discovered or how his future would have played out. Sadly, he never got the chance. I should also praise my other children because they turned out to be wonderful people too. They're all excelled in high school and went on to graduate from Lawrence University. My second son, Bryce, did follow my footsteps and became a doctor. The two of us held a practice here in Neenah until Bryce was drafted into the Army during World War II. After the war, he became an anesthesiologist. I cherish the thought that my children continued our family business. First my dad, then me, and my brother, and then my son. Generations of medical professionals dedicated to helping their communities. It was an incredible legacy. Eventually, all three children left the Neenah area, but I would like to think that they took a lot of Neenah with them. As for me, I stayed in Neenah with my dear wife. Eventually, my health problems returned, and I passed away on July 15, 1945, in Madison after months of ill health. I had been a physician for Neenah for 45 years and was proud to have served this community. Thank you for your time, and please stay healthy.